The Woman Next Door. Written and published by Ciro Irmici. Feel free to subscribe for more content. Now let's get into the book. Preface. Life is a series of random encounters, some of which have the power to change everything. The Woman Next Door tells one such story, a tale where the mundane transforms into an unsettling intrigue. Laura, the protagonist, is trying to rebuild her life in a peaceful suburban neighborhood. However, the veneer of normalcy is shattered by the arrival of a new neighbor, whose smile hides far more than it reveals. Within these pages, you will discover a story that masterfully blends mystery, suspense, and the allure of the unpredictable. It's a journey into the secrets people keep, the connections that bind lives together, and the choices that lead to unimaginable consequences. Each chapter reveals another piece of the puzzle, keeping the reader on edge until the very last page. This book is for those who appreciate stories that delve into the complexities of human relationships, and for anyone who cannot resist a well-crafted mystery. Get ready to step into a world where nothing is as it seems, and every detail carries a hint of the unexpected. Chapter 1. A New Beginning. Laura stared at the open box on the floor of her new living room. The house was quiet, too quiet. Yet that calmness was exactly what she desperately needed. After months of tension, fights, and the unraveling of her marriage, moving to a new neighborhood seemed like the right choice. A modest home with a garden big enough to plant some flowers, but not so large as to be overwhelming. A place where she could finally start over. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Rows of tidy houses, serene streets lined with trees. The kind of place where people greeted their neighbors with a nod and exchanged pleasantries over garden fences. Laura hoped that this normalcy might prove contagious. As she unpacked dishes in the kitchen, a movement outside the window caught her eye. A woman was stepping out of a sleek, dark car with a grace that seemed out of place on the quiet street. Her dark hair cascaded in perfect waves over her shoulders, and a beige coat hugged her figure with effortless elegance. She carried a small suitcase, which she set by the door of the house next to Laura's before pausing to glance around. Their eyes met. Laura quickly looked away, embarrassed at having been caught staring. The woman, however, smiled. A smile that wasn't quite warm but not cold either. It was enigmatic, leaving Laura intrigued. The new neighbor introduced herself a few days later when Laura was taking out the trash. "I just moved in too," the woman said, her voice calm and melodious. "It's nice to have such a kind neighbor." Laura laughed nervously. Kind? She hadn't done anything to earn that label, but the compliment was oddly reassuring. As the days went by, Laura began to notice peculiarities about Miriam, her new neighbor's name. As she'd learned, Miriam had an uncanny ability to appear and disappear. One moment, she would be in the garden trimming a hedge. The next, she'd vanish without a sound. There were no visitors, no packages delivered, no music drifting from her windows. It was just Miriam, impeccable and reserved. One evening, while walking her dog, Laura noticed a light on in Miriam's house. A silhouette moved across the living room window, but before Laura could make out what was happening, the curtain was drawn. On her way back, she felt a strange unease. Why would someone as elegant and self-assured as Miriam choose such a secluded place to live? And why did she seem so elusive? The monotony of Laura's days was broken when she found a package on her doorstep addressed to Miriam. Wrong delivery, she thought. Knocking on her neighbor's door, Miriam opened almost immediately, as though she had been standing right behind it. Her smile was the same as before, but there was something different in her eyes, an emotion Laura couldn't quite place. Was it irritation? Or worse, fear? "Thank you, that's very kind of you," Miriam said, quickly taking the package. Laura hesitated, then asked, "Is everything all right?" She hoped her curiosity didn't seem too obvious. Miriam paused for a moment, her smile faltering just slightly. "Oh, of course. Just tired from the move," she replied, her smile returning to full force. With that, she closed the door gently, leaving Laura staring at the freshly painted blue surface. That night, Laura struggled to sleep. Miriam's face lingered in her mind, particularly the fleeting shadow she had seen in her neighbor's eyes. "Maybe I'm just imagining things," she told herself, pulling the covers over her shoulders. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to discover about the woman next door. The package, the fleeting glances, the unsettling quiet. It all left a question mark in Laura's mind. Who exactly was Miriam? And why did she seem so out of place in their unassuming little neighborhood? Laura knew she shouldn't pry, but curiosity was already taking root, tugging at her thoughts in a way that felt impossible to ignore. Chapter 2. A Smile to Decipher. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen curtains, casting long shadows across the table where Laura's favorite mug sat steaming with coffee. She glanced out the window and noticed Miriam in the garden next door. She was crouched over a plant, her hands covered in gardening gloves. The scene was perfect, almost idyllic, but there was something unnatural about her movements. Each gesture seemed too deliberate, as though she were acting in a carefully rehearsed play. Laura shook her head, trying to dismiss her unsettling thoughts. "Maybe I'm reading too much into this," she muttered to herself, but part of her couldn't ignore that Miriam never seemed to behave as one might expect. She never spoke to the neighbors, didn't frequent local spots like the nearby grocery store, and when she left her house, it was always at odd hours. A strange conversation. A few days later, Laura had the chance to speak with Miriam again. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and Laura was planting daisies in her garden. Miriam appeared out of nowhere, moving silently as though she'd been summoned by the stillness. "You have a good touch with flowers," she said, tilting her head in a way that seemed almost theatrical. Laura, caught off guard, stood up and brushed the dirt from her hands. "Oh, thanks. They're just daisies, nothing special," she replied with a shy smile. Miriam remained silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on Laura's dirt-streaked hands. Then, with a smile that seemed almost too perfect, she remarked, "You know, flowers always have meaning. For instance, daisies symbolize innocence and purity. Fascinating, isn't it?" Laura nodded, trying to decipher Miriam's intent. "Yes, I suppose it's nice to think they have meanings," she said, though the conversation left her slightly uneasy. Miriam crouched next to one of the plants, lightly touching a bloom with her gloved fingers. "But, you know," she continued in a darker tone, "not all flowers represent something positive. Some are symbols of betrayal, others of revenge." A shiver ran down Laura's spine. She wasn't sure if Miriam was joking or if her words carried a hidden weight. "I never thought about it that way," Laura replied, trying to keep her tone light. Miriam stood up, brushing off her gloves. "It's always interesting to think about what things truly mean, don't you think?" she said, before walking back toward her house. Unsettling details. That evening, Laura couldn't shake the memory of their conversation. She decided to look up the meanings of flowers online and stumbled upon a page detailing how certain plants were associated with dark events. She felt foolish for giving such a trivial thing any weight, but Miriam's words lingered in her mind like an unanswered question. A few days later, while jogging around the neighborhood, Laura noticed something unusual. Miriam's house, which always had at least one light on, was completely dark. Slowing her pace, she stopped in front of the driveway. The gravel showed signs of movement, footprints pacing back and forth. Suddenly, a sharp noise came from inside the house, like something heavy falling. Startled, Laura hesitated, glancing toward the door. Before she could decide whether to knock or leave, a voice behind her made her jump. "Are you looking for something?" It was Miriam, standing on the sidewalk with her piercing gaze fixed on Laura. Laura turned, scrambling for an excuse. "Oh, sorry. I was jogging and just stopped to catch my breath." Miriam said nothing for a moment. Then her enigmatic smile reappeared. "It's always good to pause and observe. You notice so much when you take the time to look." An unexpected invitation. The next morning, Laura found a note slipped under her door. Written in elegant handwriting, it read, "Join me for tea tomorrow afternoon. I'd love to get to know you better." Miriam. Laura hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to accept the invitation, but her curiosity was too strong to ignore. Miriam intrigued her, and perhaps this would be an opportunity to understand her better. When the following afternoon arrived, Laura prepared carefully. She told herself it would be just a simple chat between neighbors, nothing more. But as she walked up to Miriam's door, a wave of unease settled in her stomach. She couldn't have known then that the tea invitation was more than it seemed, that it would mark the beginning of something far beyond her imagination. Chapter 3. Secrets Within the Walls. Laura approached Miriam's door with a tray of homemade cookies, trying to quell the anxiety churning in her stomach. She had always been a sociable person, but there was something about Miriam that unsettled her. Maybe it was the way she spoke, measured, always laden with unspoken undertones, or the piercing gaze that seemed to see right through her. Before Laura could knock, the door swung open. Miriam stood there, wearing a simple yet impeccable black silk dress that perfectly framed her elegant figure. "Welcome, Laura. Please come in," she said, gesturing with a smooth motion. The house was surprisingly bare. No photos, no personal touches, just essential furniture and stark white walls that seemed almost sterile. "What a lovely home," Laura lied, placing the tray on the kitchen table. Miriam smiled faintly. "I like simplicity. The fewer distractions, the clearer the mind." As Miriam prepared the tea, Laura glanced around. There was something off about the house. Everything seemed too perfect, like a stage set. Not a single item was out of place. Everything was clean to the point of sterility. When Miriam returned with the tea, Laura forced herself to focus on their conversation. But the sense of unease lingered. A strange discovery. After a few rounds of polite small talk, Miriam excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Laura alone in the room. Unsure of what to do, Laura got up and wandered over to a shelf displaying a few books. She noticed they all looked brand new, their glossy covers uncreased, as if they were chosen more for decoration than for reading. What caught her attention, however, was a small wooden box tucked discreetly in the corner of the shelf. It was old, with intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story. Unable to resist, Laura opened it. Inside, she found a stack of yellowed photographs. The first photo showed a young woman who looked remarkably like Miriam standing next to a tall, broad-shouldered man. Both were smiling, but the woman's expression seemed forced, as though she were masking her true emotions. Laura was about to look at the second photo when a voice behind her made her jump. "Did you find something interesting?" Miriam's tone was calm, but there was an icy edge to it. Laura spun around, feeling like a child caught sneaking cookies. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry," she stammered, quickly placing the box back on the shelf. Miriam walked over slowly, taking the box in her hands with a controlled, deliberate motion. "It's a family heirloom," she said, her smile reappearing. "It holds memories that are very dear to me." Questions begin to grow. Laura left shortly afterward, but the photos lingered in her mind. Who was the man standing next to Miriam? And why did Miriam look so different, almost trapped, in that picture? As the days passed, Laura found herself consumed by curiosity. One night, while reading on her couch, she heard strange noises from Miriam's house. Heavy footsteps, followed by the sound of something being dragged. She moved to her window and peeked through the curtains. Miriam's house was dark, but a faint shadow flitted across an upstairs window. Laura shivered but told herself not to let her imagination run wild. A disturbing clue. A few days later, while searching through old boxes for some paperwork, Laura stumbled across a yellowed newspaper clipping. The grainy black and white photo was unmistakable. Miriam's face stared back at her. The article described a woman suspected of involvement in her husband's disappearance. He was a wealthy businessman, and their marriage had been rumored to be troubled. The final paragraph mentioned that while no charges were filed, the woman had sold their home and relocated shortly thereafter. Laura's heart raced. Could Miriam be the same woman? And if so, what was she hiding? Beyond the walls. That evening, Laura made a decision. She needed answers. When she saw Miriam leave her house in the usual quiet manner, Laura seized the opportunity to investigate. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she felt compelled to act. With a wire she had hastily grabbed from her toolbox, she fumbled with the lock, imitating the lock-picking scenes she'd seen in movies. To her surprise, the door clicked open with ease. The interior was even more barren than she remembered. There was a strange smell in the air, a mixture of aged wood and something acrid. Laura moved cautiously, her ears attuned to the slightest noise. Upstairs, she found a locked door. She tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Before she could investigate further, a sudden noise from downstairs made her freeze. It was a sharp, deliberate sound, like the creak of a floorboard. Her breath hitched as realization struck. Miriam had returned. Panicking, Laura scanned the room for a hiding spot. The closet stood slightly ajar, and she slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind her. In the suffocating darkness, her hands trembled as she pressed herself against the back wall, straining to hear the approaching footsteps. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to leave, but it was too late. Miriam's steps grew louder, closer, and more deliberate, as though she knew exactly where to look. Chapter 4. A Strange Coincidence. Laura huddled in the closet, holding her breath as footsteps echoed in the stillness of the house. Every sound was amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the rustle of fabric, the faint click of a door closing. She was certain Miriam had returned, but why hadn't she heard the sound of her car? Her heart pounded in her chest. Would she be discovered? What could she possibly explain, say, or do if found lurking in her neighbor's house? But just as she braced for the inevitable, the footsteps faded, and the house fell silent once more. After several tense minutes, Laura mustered the courage to emerge from her hiding place. She moved with painstaking caution, avoiding any noise. The locked door upstairs loomed, both inviting and forbidding. She decided not to push her luck, at least not that night. Slipping out of the house, she left as quietly as she had entered. A disturbing detail. The next day, Laura sat in her kitchen, still shaken by the previous night's intrusion. She couldn't shake the sense of looming danger. Determined to distract herself, she began a deep cleaning of her house. While dusting an old bookshelf, she stumbled upon a photo album she hadn't opened in years. The album was filled with memories of her childhood. Summer vacations at the beach, family gatherings, and days spent with friends. Flipping through it, she came across a photo that made her freeze. The image showed a group of people at an elegant dinner party. It had been one of her father's work events many years ago. In the center of the photo was a face she instantly recognized. Miriam, or at least a woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to her. Laura stared at the picture, struggling to find a rational explanation. It seemed impossible. The woman in the photo didn't appear any younger than Miriam did now. Her face, hair, and even her enigmatic smile were identical. Unexpected connections. Taking the photo, Laura searched online for information about the event captured in the image. After hours of digging, she found an old article describing the dinner. It had been a celebration of a major business partnership between two companies. One of the companies had been run by a man named Alessandro Morandi, a name Laura recognized from her earlier research. He was the husband mentioned in the article about Miriam's past, the man who had mysteriously disappeared. The connection was undeniable. Miriam must have been linked to this event, to this man. But how did it all fit together? Could there be a link between her and Laura's family? And what did this discovery mean? A chilling revelation. Consumed by curiosity and fear, Laura reached out to her friend Carla, a journalist with experience in uncovering hidden truths. Laura showed her the photo and recounted everything she had discovered so far. Carla agreed to help and immediately began investigating. A few days later, Carla returned with unsettling news. Miriam had never been formally accused of her husband's disappearance, but her name had surfaced in at least 3 other cases of missing persons, all connected to large sums of money or complicated business dealings. It's as if she only appears when there's something to gain, Carla explained. And when things get messy, she vanishes. The confrontation. Determined to uncover the truth, Laura decided to confront Miriam directly. She invited her neighbor over for coffee, doing her best to hide her nervousness. Miriam accepted the invitation with her usual enigmatic smile, seemingly unsurprised by the gesture. When Miriam arrived, Laura greeted her warmly but felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She took a deep breath and set the stage for what she knew would be a dangerous conversation. "Miriam," Laura began, carefully placing her coffee cup on the table, "I found something interesting." She pulled out the photo from the album and laid it on the table in front of Miriam. "This is you, isn't it?" Miriam gazed at the photo with an unnerving calmness, her expression unreadable. "What an interesting discovery," she said, her tone neutral. "And what do you think you've learned from it?" Laura held her ground, meeting Miriam's unflinching gaze. "I just want to know who you really are. Why are you here? And what are you hiding?" Miriam stood slowly, picking up the photo with steady hands. "You know, Laura, there are things better left unknown. Haven't you ever wondered why some doors should stay closed?" She let the photo fall back onto the table and stepped toward the door. Just before leaving, she turned back, her eyes dark and unreadable. "Be careful not to dig too deeply. You might not be ready for what you find." Miriam's words echoed in Laura's mind long after she left. They weren't just a warning, they felt like a challenge. And Laura knew she couldn't let it go. Not now. The secrets buried behind Miriam's smile were calling to her, and she couldn't turn away. Chapter 5. The darkness behind the smile. Laura spent the night tossing and turning, unable to shake Miriam's words. Some things are better left unknown. Letting it go was no longer an option. Her curiosity had spiraled into obsession, fueled by the growing conviction that Miriam was entangled in something dark. Something that not only threatened Laura's peace, but perhaps even her life. A disturbing investigation. The next morning, Laura dove headfirst into researching Miriam. She scoured every online resource she could find, from old newspaper archives to public records. Slowly, a chilling narrative began to emerge. Miriam wasn't her real name. She had changed identities multiple times over the past decade, moving from city to city. In every place she had lived, there was a common thread: disappearances, financial scandals, or mysterious incidents. Some articles suggested she had been suspected of multimillion-dollar fraud schemes, but no formal charges had ever been brought against her. She always seemed to stay one step ahead of the law. One name kept appearing in these records: Alessandro Morandi, the man who had disappeared years earlier and who was supposedly Miriam's husband. The information was fragmented, but one thing was clear: Miriam had left a trail of chaos wherever she went. A sinister warning. That evening, Laura received an anonymous phone call. The voice on the other end was male, calm, and chillingly direct. "Stay out of this. You don't know what you're getting into." Before Laura could respond, the line went dead. Her pulse quickened as she looked out the window. Miriam's house was dark, but she thought she saw a shadow moving near the gate. Stepping back from the window, her hands trembled. Her fear was matched only by a surge of determination. Whatever was happening, she couldn't back down now. A revelatory meeting. Determined not to face this alone, Laura met Carla, her journalist friend, at a cafe far from the neighborhood. Carla brought a stack of documents she had unearthed, including statements from people who had known Miriam in the past. One letter, written by a man who claimed to have been manipulated by Miriam, stood out. He described how she had drawn him into a web of financial fraud, using charm and calculated moves to exploit him. "Miriam is brilliant," Carla said. "She knows how to weave herself into people's lives and use them for her own gain. And when she's gotten what she wants, she disappears. But what I don't understand is why she's so interested in you." That question haunted Laura as well. Why had Miriam moved in next door? Was it really just a coincidence? Or was there a deeper reason? A dark discovery. Back at home, Laura made a bold decision. She would confront the mystery head-on. Watching Miriam leave her house that evening, Laura waited until her neighbor's car disappeared down the street. Then, armed with a flashlight and a trembling resolve, she approached Miriam's home. Using a small crowbar she had hidden in her jacket, Laura pried open a ground-floor window and climbed inside. The house was as she remembered: orderly, cold, devoid of personality. But this time, she was determined to search every corner. When she reached the locked room upstairs, she noticed something lodged in the keyhole: a small magnetic key. Her hands shaking, she inserted it. The lock clicked open. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of the house. Its walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. In the center of the room stood a large desk piled with documents. Laura's stomach turned as she stepped closer. Many of the photos were of her, taken without her knowledge. They showed her at the supermarket, walking her dog, even asleep on her couch in her living room. A past resurfaces. Among the clutter on the desk was an open letter. It was formal in tone but filled with deeply personal details about Laura. Her divorce, her financial struggles, even information about her father. Reading further, she realized Miriam had been investigating her family. The letter referenced Laura's father, a retired businessman, and linked him to an old financial scandal. Laura's breath caught as she pieced it together. Miriam wasn't here by coincidence. She was here for something tied to her family's past. As Laura tried to process this revelation, she heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Miriam had returned. The imminent confrontation. Laura froze, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She quickly switched off her flashlight and moved toward the closet, the only hiding spot in the room. Closing the door just as footsteps echoed up the stairs, she clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle her breathing. Miriam's voice carried faintly through the house as she made a phone call, her tone calm and composed. "Yes, everything is in place. No, there's been no interference." Yet, the sound of her heels drew closer to the locked room, and Laura braced herself. She had uncovered something dark, something dangerous, and now there was no turning back. Chapter 6. Beyond the half-open door. The sound of the car pulling into the driveway froze Laura in place. Miriam had returned, and Laura was trapped in the room filled with secrets. Her heart pounded wildly as she scanned for a hiding place. The only option was the dark corner behind a heavy curtain. She crouched there, holding her breath. From downstairs came the click of the front door unlocking and the steady clack of Miriam's heels on the floor. Each step sounded like a hammer striking Laura's frayed nerves. She cursed herself for letting her curiosity carry her this far, but it was too late to turn back. An unplanned confrontation. Miriam entered the room and paused in the doorway. She seemed to sense that something was amiss. With a slow, deliberate motion, she flicked on the light, illuminating the room. Laura stayed perfectly still, hoping the curtain would conceal her. Miriam moved to the desk and surveyed the papers Laura had left in disarray. Her normally composed face now showed a faint crease of irritation. "You're quite curious, Laura," Miriam said suddenly, without turning around. Her voice was low, but it carried an implicit threat. "You know, not everyone appreciates those who stick their noses where they don't belong." A chill ran down Laura's spine. She knew she'd been discovered, but stepping out of hiding felt unthinkable. Miriam turned slowly, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Then, with a cold smile, she approached the curtain. Laura held her breath, her heart racing. But Miriam didn't pull it back. Instead, she stopped in front of the window, gazing out into the night. "There are secrets that can destroy a person," Miriam continued, as if speaking to someone unseen. "And you, Laura, seem to be very good at uncovering them." The escape. While Miriam was distracted, Laura seized the opportunity to slip out from behind the curtain and dart out of the room. Her hands trembled as she hurried down the hallway, searching for the staircase. Miriam noticed the movement and shouted, "Where do you think you're going?" Laura didn't look back. She raced down the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste, and bolted for the front door. She managed to fling it open and escape just as Miriam's footsteps thundered behind her. Outside, Laura ran toward her house, her adrenaline pumping. She didn't stop until she was safely inside, slamming the door shut and locking it behind her. A bold decision. Back in the safety of her home, Laura's mind swirled with images of the room she had just fled. The photos of herself, the notes about her father, the meticulous details Miriam had gathered about her and her family. It was all too much to process. It was clear that Miriam's presence next door wasn't a coincidence. This was personal. Fear gave way to anger. Laura knew she couldn't let Miriam continue to manipulate and destroy lives. She needed to uncover the full truth and bring it to someone who could stop her. She gathered all the evidence she had. The photos, the documents Carla had found, and even the article linking Miriam to Alessandro Morandi's disappearance. Laura texted Carla, asking her to meet at the local police station. The time had come to expose Miriam, another side of Miriam. Before Laura could leave her house, a sharp knock startled her. She froze. Peering through the peephole, she saw Miriam standing on her porch. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were fixed on the door, as if she knew Laura was inside. "Open up, Laura," Miriam said firmly. "We need to talk." Laura backed away from the door, her pulse racing. She didn't reply. Miriam knocked again, louder this time. "Don't be foolish, Laura. You know you can't run from this." Grabbing her phone, Laura called Carla, whispering, "She's here. She's at my door. Please, come quickly." A difficult choice. Eventually, the knocking stopped. Laura peeked out the window and watched as Miriam walked away, disappearing into the darkness. But Laura knew this wasn't over. Miriam wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. Laura took a deep breath and made a decision. She wouldn't let Miriam control her with fear. If this was a game of cat and mouse, Laura was ready to fight back. She would protect herself and her family, no matter the cost. The truth had to come out, and Laura was prepared to risk everything to make sure it did. Chapter 7. The Game of Manipulation. The tension in Laura's life was palpable. Miriam hadn't been seen since the confrontation at her doorstep, but the silence was far from reassuring. Laura knew Miriam wouldn't leave things unfinished. Now, she had to prepare to defend herself and uncover the truth once and for all. An unexpected message. One morning, while brewing coffee, Laura noticed an anonymous envelope slipped under her door. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single, neatly folded page. The handwriting was precise, almost too perfect. You don't know who you're playing with. It's not too late to stop. Stay in your place or face the consequences. The message was clear, but it didn't intimidate Laura as Miriam had likely hoped. Instead, it fueled her determination. She resolved to report everything to the police but wanted to gather as much evidence as possible first. An unexpected ally. Laura contacted Carla, her journalist friend, who arrived that evening with a bag full of documents. "I've dug deeper," Carla said, placing the bag on the table. "Miriam isn't just a con artist. She might be part of a much larger criminal network. There are traces connecting her activities to offshore accounts and mysterious disappearances. People who probably knew too much." Laura listened intently as she flipped through the documents. Each page was a piece of an unsettling puzzle. "Do you think she's here because of me? Or is this about my father?" Laura asked. Carla hesitated. "I don't know, but this feels more personal than random. Miriam doesn't leave anything to chance." Miriam's trap. A few days later, Laura received an unexpected dinner invitation from Miriam. The gesture was surreal, given all that had transpired. The invitation came with a note: to clear the air. No tricks. Laura was torn. She knew it could be a trap, but it also felt like an opportunity to confront Miriam face to face. In the end, she decided to go, but not before informing Carla and securing copies of all the evidence in a safe place. A dinner fraught with tension. Miriam's house was bathed in a warm, inviting glow when Laura arrived. Miriam greeted her with a polite smile, as if nothing unusual had ever passed between them. "I'm glad you accepted my invitation," Miriam said, gesturing toward an elegantly set dining table. Dinner began with small talk, but the air was thick with tension. Laura watched Miriam closely, searching for hidden meanings in her words and gestures. "Miriam, why did you move here?" Laura finally asked, breaking the flow of conversation. Miriam paused, calmly placing her wine glass on the table. "Do you really think it's that simple?" she said, tilting her head slightly. "I'm not here by chance, Laura. But I'm not the monster you think I am." Laura held her breath. "Then explain. Tell me what you want from me." Miriam leaned forward, her expression serious. "What I want is to protect myself. And to do that, I need to make sure you don't interfere." The emerging truth. As the dinner progressed, Miriam began to reveal unsettling details. She spoke of her husband, Alessandro Morandi, describing him as a manipulative and ruthless man. "I thought I could beat him at his own game," she said, her voice laced with bitterness. "But it didn't go as planned." Miriam explained that Alessandro had left a trail of shady dealings and dangerous enemies. "I'm not hiding from you, Laura. I'm hiding from them," she said, locking eyes with her neighbor. Laura was confused. "But what does this have to do with me?" Miriam hesitated, then stood up. She retrieved an envelope from a drawer and placed it on the table. "Your name came up in Alessandro's documents. He and your father had unfinished business, something big. And I'm here to make sure it stays buried." With trembling hands, Laura opened the envelope. Inside were old letters and contracts, all signed by her father and Alessandro. The documents hinted at a joint investment in a failed project that had caused massive financial losses. A dangerous mind game. As Laura processed the revelations, Miriam resumed her calm, composed demeanor. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Laura, but you need to let this go. If you keep digging, you'll attract attention from people far more dangerous than me." Laura stood, anger boiling inside her. "And you think threatening me is the answer? I won't just stand by while you play games with my life." Miriam smiled faintly but said nothing. Laura realized that whatever Miriam's next move was, she needed to act quickly. Chapter 8: Hidden Truths. Laura spent the night reading and rereading the documents left by Miriam. Each word revealed new details about a past that seemed impossibly connected to her family. Contracts, letters, and notes exchanged between Alessandro Morandi and her father, Massimo, painted a dark picture of risky ventures and deals left undone. What had started as a promising business partnership had turned into a disaster that destroyed lives and left deep scars. Massimo's shadow. The next day, Laura decided to confront her father. She drove to his home in the suburbs, where Massimo now lived alone, far removed from the business world. When Laura showed him the documents, he remained silent for a long moment. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he sank into the armchair in his living room. "I didn't want you to find out like this," Massimo said, his expression filled with regret. "Alessandro and I were partners in a project that was supposed to change everything, an investment in an innovative energy plant. It seemed like the perfect opportunity, but it wasn't." Laura sat quietly as her father explained how Alessandro had manipulated financial data, promising returns that didn't exist. When it all collapsed, the consequences were devastating. Alessandro lost everything, and I had to make hard choices to protect our family. Somehow, Miriam was involved. She was his partner, or at least that's what he claimed. Massimo looked down, gripping the edge of his chair. "I don't know what she wants now, but stay away from her. She's dangerous, Laura. More than you can imagine." An old ally. Determined not to stop, Laura shared the new information with Carla. Together, they decided to meet with an ex-employee of Alessandro, a former accountant named Fabrizio who had worked for him before the company's collapse. Reluctantly, Fabrizio agreed to meet them at a cafe outside the city. Alessandro was brilliant but ruthless, Fabrizio said, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. And Miriam, she was the real mastermind, cold, calculating. "I don't know why she's so interested in you, but I can tell you this. Miriam never moves without a reason." Fabrizio revealed that before Alessandro's disappearance, large sums of money had been transferred to secret offshore accounts. Miriam had orchestrated the transactions, but no one had ever been able to prove her involvement. "If she's back," Fabrizio warned, "it's because she thinks there's still something to gain. Be careful." A new discovery. When Laura returned home, she found another anonymous envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a photo, a vintage image of her father, Alessandro, and Miriam sitting together at an elegant dinner. Scrawled across the photo in neat handwriting were the words, "Not all blood is innocent." The phrase sent a chill through her. Who had sent the photo? And what did it mean? Her mind raced with questions, but one thought stood out. Miriam wasn't the only player in this game. Someone else was involved. Someone determined to keep the past buried at all costs. A shocking twist. That evening, Laura received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was low and measured. "If you want to know the truth, come to the old warehouse on the highway." Alone. It was an enormous risk, but Laura felt she had no choice. She had to know. Before leaving, she sent a message to Carla, explaining where she was going, then drove to the location. The warehouse was abandoned, its walls cloaked in decay and silence. Inside, she found Miriam seated on a metal chair in the center of an empty room. "You're brave, Laura," Miriam said, not rising. "But I'm not sure if that's a strength or a weakness." Laura approached cautiously. "What do you want from me, Miriam? Why have you come back?" Miriam sighed, her gaze heavy with an unexpected weariness. "I didn't want to involve you, but your father, he did something I can't ignore." Before she could elaborate, a noise from behind startled them both. They turned to see a third figure enter the room, a tall, broad-shouldered man whom Laura had never seen before. He held a gun in his hand. "Welcome to the truth," the man said, his smile as cold as the steel in his grip. Chapter 9. The Impossible Escape. Laura froze as the man raised his gun, his sinister smile illuminated by the dim light streaming through the warehouse's broken windows. Miriam, however, remained unervingly calm, as if she had expected this moment. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of a flickering neon light. "Who are you?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. The man ignored her, instead pointing the gun directly at Miriam. "You've played your games for too long, Miriam. Did you really think you could hide forever?" Miriam crossed her arms, maintaining her cold composure. "You're not here to talk, are you? Then let's end this. But leave her out of it," she said, gesturing toward Laura with a slight nod. The confrontation. The man began to pace slowly, his boots scraping against the concrete floor. "Oh, don't worry," he said with mocking sarcasm. "I've got nothing against your young friend. But whether she likes it or not, she's involved." Laura's heart pounded in her chest. Why am I involved? What does this have to do with me?" she shouted, fear giving way to frustration. "You're just a piece of the puzzle," the man replied. "Your dear father made deals he never should have made. And Miriam here thought she could bury it all." "It's not that simple," Miriam interjected, her voice icy and controlled. "What you're looking for doesn't exist anymore. Alessandro destroyed it all before you could get your hands on it." The man chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Alessandro was a fool. But you, Miriam, you're different. You know where the money is. And I know you're smart enough to have kept something for yourself. A fight for survival." Laura realized the situation was spiraling out of control. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. She spotted a side door but noticed it was secured with a padlock. She needed a distraction to buy time. Suddenly, Miriam acted. She grabbed a chair and hurled it toward the man. The clanging of metal against the floor echoed through the warehouse, making him flinch. Laura seized the opportunity, darting toward the locked door. She tugged at the padlock, but it wouldn't budge. "Run, Laura!" Miriam shouted as she struggled to disarm the man. Laura frantically searched for something to break the lock. She found a rusted metal pipe and swung it with all her strength. After several desperate strikes, the padlock snapped, and the door creaked open. "Come on," she yelled to Miriam. Miriam managed to land a blow on the man, knocking him to the ground. With surprising agility, she sprinted toward Laura. "Go," she urged, shoving her through the doorway. The race into the night. The two women found themselves in a dark, narrow hallway. Behind them, the man's shouts echoed as he regained his footing. Laura's breathing was ragged as they ran, her heart pounding louder than his distant footsteps. They burst outside into the chilly night and sprinted toward Laura's car parked nearby. "Don't stop," Miriam shouted, glancing back over her shoulder. Laura jumped into the driver's seat, her hands shaking as she fumbled to start the engine. Miriam dove into the passenger seat, and the car roared to life. They sped away, the man now a distant figure fading into the darkness of the warehouse. An unexpected admiration. Once they were safely on a deserted road, both women sat in silence, catching their breath. Miriam turned to Laura, her usual detached expression softened by a faint smile. "You're braver than I thought," she said quietly. "I'm not brave," Laura replied, her voice unsteady. "I'm just tired of being manipulated." Miriam nodded, gazing out the window. "Welcome to my world." The final revelation. As they regained their composure, Miriam finally opened up. "Your father and Alessandro were involved in a deal with an international criminal network. It wasn't just about money, it was about power. When everything fell apart, Alessandro tried to protect me. He knew I didn't want to be part of that world. But in the end, it wasn't enough." "Why me?" Laura asked, her voice still shaking. "Because your father is the last one who has the original documents. Those documents could bring down the entire network. And now, everyone knows you're the key to getting to him. A plan to survive." The two women knew they couldn't keep running forever. They had to confront the threat and expose the truth. With Carla's help and the evidence they had gathered, they decided to contact the authorities, but only after ensuring no one could stop them. "This is our only chance," Miriam said, her gaze locked on Laura. "But you have to trust me." Laura hesitated, her mind racing with doubts. But in the end, she nodded. "I don't have another choice." Together, they began to formulate a plan. One that would risk everything but could finally bring an end to the darkness that had engulfed their lives. Chapter 10. The Silence of the Night. The plan was ready, or at least it seemed to be. Laura and Miriam had spent hours meticulously preparing their next move. The goal was to deliver the incriminating documents to the authorities without being intercepted. But the night before the handoff was wrapped in an unsettling silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Laura sat in her living room, staring at the scattered papers on the table. The tension was almost unbearable. Miriam, on the other hand, appeared calm, sitting in a corner with her gaze fixed on the window. Her presence was both reassuring and unnerving. "Are you sure this will work?" Laura asked, breaking the silence. Miriam turned slowly, a faint smile on her face. "Nothing is certain, Laura, but this is our best chance." The handoff. At the first light of dawn, Laura and Miriam headed toward a meeting point they had agreed on with Carla. The plan was straightforward. Carla would take the documents and deliver them to a trusted contact within the authorities. But nothing ever went as planned. As they approached the location, Laura noticed something odd. A black car parked a short distance away. Someone inside appeared to be watching them. "They're following us," Laura said, her voice tinged with panic. Miriam glanced in the rearview mirror. "Don't stop. Stick to the plan." But when they arrived at the meeting point, Carla wasn't there. Instead, a man in a suit stood next to a gray car. Miriam swore under her breath. "It's a trap. The betrayal." The man approached slowly, his hands raised as if to show he wasn't armed. "Miriam, I knew you wouldn't be able to resist," he said with a cold smile. Then he turned his attention to Laura. "And you must be Laura. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." Laura felt a chill run through her. "Who are you?" "I work for the people Miriam thought she could outsmart," he said. "But I'm not here for her. I'm here for the documents. Hand them over, and we can forget all this ever happened." Miriam stepped forward, placing herself between Laura and the man. "That's never going to happen," she said firmly. "Those documents are your undoing, and you know it." The man chuckled darkly. "Oh, Miriam, always so dramatic." An improvised escape. As the man spoke, Laura noticed another car approaching in the distance. It was Carla. "It's her," Laura shouted, pointing toward the vehicle. Miriam didn't hesitate. "Run to her. I'll handle him." But Laura began, but Miriam cut her off. Go now. Laura sprinted toward Carla's car, clutching the documents tightly to her chest. Miriam engaged the man, keeping him occupied long enough for Laura to jump into the passenger seat. Drive, Laura shouted, and Carla hit the gas. The car screeched away, leaving the man behind in a cloud of dust. Price to pay. As Carla sped toward the police station, Laura looked back, searching for Miriam. But she couldn't see her. A wave of guilt and helplessness washed over her. We have to go back for her, Laura said, her voice cracking. We can't, Carla replied firmly. If we go back, we put everything at risk. When they reached the station, they were met by a group of officers who had been briefed by Carla. Laura handed over the documents and recounted everything. The officers assured them that an investigation would begin immediately and that both women would be protected. An uncertain fate. Hours passed as Laura waited anxiously for news about Miriam. When the phone finally rang, it was one of the officers. We found the scene at the meeting point, he said. But there's no sign of Miriam. The man she confronted has been arrested, but she's gone. A mix of relief and worry swept over Laura. The man had been captured, but had Miriam survived? Or had she been forced to flee once again? This time for good? A whispered goodbye. A few days later, Laura found a letter slipped under her door. The handwriting was unmistakably Miriam's. Laura, you did the right thing. You're safe now, and so is your family. I have to leave, but I want you to know I never used you. You've proven to be far stronger than I imagined. Goodbye, and thank you. M. Laura folded the letter, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. Miriam had vanished, but her sacrifice would not be forgotten. As Laura stared out the window at the rising sun, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had survived the darkness, and though the scars would remain, she was ready to rebuild her life and ensure that the truth Miriam had risked everything to reveal would not be buried again. Epilogue. The documents led to the arrest of several members of the criminal network, including a prominent international financier. Slowly, Laura returned to her life, but with a newfound sense of awareness. She was no longer the insecure woman she once was. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. Miriam, however, remained a mystery, an enigmatic shadow who had forever changed the course of Laura's life, leaving her with a legacy of strength and determination. Conclusion. The story of Laura and Miriam is more than a simple tale of mystery. It is a reflection on the strength we can discover within ourselves when confronted with adversity, on the courage required to face the unknown, and on the complexities of human relationships. Miriam, with all her shadows, taught Laura that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Laura, in turn, proved that even in the darkest situations, we can find a way to rise back into the light. This story invites readers not to be overwhelmed by circumstances, to seek the truth, and to hold on to hope, even when everything seems lost. Thank you for reading The Woman Next Door. This book is a journey through dark mysteries and personal challenges, but it is also an invitation to reflect on how far we are willing to fight for the truth.